Show you how to cast on and off the Sentro 40-pin knitting machine, but this applies to any knitting machine you have because casting on and off is the same way. The first thing you'll want to do is find your first pin. On the Sentro 40-pin knitting machine, the first pin is the one right before the black pin. So this white pin is right before the black pin. What I have done is colored with a Sharpie this little middle piece black so that it's easier to identify, because once you start knitting around, it's actually quite hard to find that black pin. That's why if you use a Sharpie to mark it, you'll be able to easily know where your first pin is. Now grab your yarn. This is casting on with waste yarn. Waste yarn is just extra yarn that is not part of your project. It's there to help for different reasons, the way you close your tube, maybe to make it neater. And so what you'll do is put about 2 to 4 inches in the middle, and you'll start between the first pin and that black pin. Ensure that the yarn is underneath the teeth of that black pin. Start spinning your handle, put the yarn behind the next pin, and then in front of and underneath that tooth of the next needle. Continue this pattern of going behind and then underneath the tooth. So this is the needle, and you can see that it has a hook underneath it, like a tooth, and that's where you want the yarn to catch. So every other needle, you're going to put the yarn behind, and then inside that tooth, behind the pin, to inside, and do that for every other pin all the way around. Total of 40 pins for the Sentro 40 pin or the Michaels Quick Knits Loops and Threads 40 pin machine. Do the same method though with your 48 or your 46 or your 22 pin machines, or even the less popular 32. What you should find is that you'll end up behind this last white pin before you get to the black pin. What you're going to do next is place it into the yarn feeder, making sure that it's right inside that middle portion right there. And then put it into your tensioner, and you can mess with that later with which one is going to work best for you and your yarn with which tension you want. Some people will double it up like this to make it a little more tight, or maybe you just want it like this, the first one, which is typically what I will do for my waste yarn cast on. Next, you'll start spinning around, cranking around, and I just hold the yarn end in the middle to make sure that it stays around these 2 little pieces right here. And then you go crank around slowly, crank your handle all the way around 40 pins, making sure it's catching okay and not tangling or anything. When you get back here, I like to again make sure that this is pulled down so that it doesn't, I'm not pulling on it too tight, just snugly pulling on it. Now you should be able to crank properly all the way around all 40 pins. And you can see how it's going around smoothly here. Casting on with waste yarn, you want to do at least 5 rows. So we'll stop at the next round. Now before you get to your next black pin, what you'll do is crank down right before the black pin, and you want to ensure that the yarn is under the last white pin. Place the remainder yarn inside the middle. Grab your working yarn, put it inside the yarn holder, making sure that it's fit right in between there, and into your tensioner. Make sure you have a couple inches and that it is underneath the black pin's tooth, black needle's tooth. And go around and just hold it down a little bit to make sure it's caught by that black pin there, which it is. And now you can go around and crank, making sure that the yarn is going underneath this portion here, and it's getting caught by the needles in its little tooth as you go around. So you can see here where it's on top and then it falls down because it has enough tension on it. And what you're trying to look for here is making sure that this yarn is not split or caught funny or not caught at all. That'll be called a tucked or a drop stitch if that happens. Continue knitting all the way around, and when you get to right before you pick up the first stitch again, I just like to gently pull on these 2 yarn ends to make sure they don't get lost, pulling down on them. And then you can go around now a little more quickly, and here's the overall view you can see. So I go around with the main color yarn. We'll crank that as much as you want until it's complete for whatever project you're doing. To cast off with this type of yarn, we will go back to right before the black pin again. Take the yarn out of the tensioner and out of your feeder. Make sure that it is underneath this last white pin here. Add your scrap yarn again. I'm going to use the same color scrap yarn. So my other ball of waste yarn is also purple. Place it in the middle of the yarn feeder, put it into your tensioner, hold it so that it goes inside the black pin's teeth here. For your cast off, you want to make sure you have at minimum 5 rows of your cast off waste yarn, because this one can come off a little more easily. As you come here towards your first and last pin, hold on to those 2 ends to make sure they don't go anywhere until it's knitted. Continue around for at least 5 rows with your cast off waste yarn. Before you get too far, just hold those 2 down and make sure they're caught. Continue with 5 rows and I'll show you how you take the project off of the machine. Ensuring that you have at least 5 rows, when you come up to your last white pin, take your yarn out of the tensioner and out of the feeder, place it in the middle of your machine. Now all you have to do is crank around twice in order to remove the project from your machine. When you go around twice, it'll just, the first one takes it off the pins and the second one will remove it from the machine entirely. And now you have a tube. And this is real short, but you'll have a tube. Next, I'll show you how you can cast off not using waste yarn. First off, when you're not using waste yarn, you'll just start off with your main color and cast on the exact same way that you did with waste yarn. I'll just show you quickly here. You're in between the white and black pins. You're going to go from inside to outside, all the way around 40 pins. Inside, outside, inside, outside. You should end up on the outside of your last white pin. Put it through your yarn feeder and into your tensioner. Now gently tug on that yarn end to make sure it gets cut properly. All right, and then go around and do however many rows that you need to do for your main color yarn. I'll just do a few rows and then I'll show you how a different way is that you can cast off just using your main color and not using waste yarn. To cast off with the main color, end right at the last white pin before your black pin, and you want to make sure you have about the length of your machine going around in order to cast off. So cut off about enough. That's going to be about the length of your machine, so about 2 feet long. Get your darning needle. I like to use a bent tip darning needle. Make sure that your yarn is under that last white pin. Crank around a few stitches to get started. What you're going to do here with your yarn on your needle, put the needle under the pin like so. Take it off of the machine and carefully pull your yarn through it. This is how we cast off, not using waste yarn. You're going to do that with every stitch around. I like to hold the next one with my fingers to make sure they don't come off of the machine, because you could drop stitches if they come off the machine. And I just pull it through, take it off of the machine, and use it for the next one here. Pull it through. I'm going to do this with every single stitch all the way around to cast off, not using waste yarn, but to cast off using your main color. When you get to the end here, you'll need to start cranking around again. So crank a few more stitches out. Hold the next stitches down with your fingers to make sure they don't come off of your machine prematurely. Grab that stitch from the inside to the outside with your darning needle, and it's going to come off of your machine. This is a great way to cast off when you're doing something like a beanie or that requires you to cinch an end tight. Continue doing this all the way around until it's off of your machine. At the end, you'll be able to draw that string tight and it will cinch the end of your tube close together like you would for the top of your beanie. Or if you have some other project that requires it to be cinched tight, maybe a toy or something like that. I mostly use waste yarn these days when I cast off, because most of my projects require me to have not a cinched end, but the tube end where I can crochet on the end of it or have a more flattened. Now, when you go around and let's say this happens to you, you just need to go back out the opposite way, crank it to lift the yarn up so you can grab it off of the pin and just take it off that way. And then you can go back this way and it's off now. Grab that last one. Now you have it, and you can pull your yarn end on the cast off, and it's going to cinch it tight. And at the bottom, you just find your yarn end and cinch that tight too, and that's also going to close up. There, now both ends of your tube are closed with a cinch, and that's just a different way to cast off. So 2 ways I showed you to cast off. One was where you want a flat tube and you use waste yarn, and the second way is if you just use your main color yarn and where you have a cinched end like this. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned a lot. Follow me and subscribe for more videos like this.